Hello everyone. This video details my process in the recreation of this Disney character in 3D. This concept looked appealing to me, so I decided to reconstruct it using Blender. Let's take a look at how I did it. But before we do, please do hit that like button if you enjoy this type of content. Also, subscribe and select the notification button so that you get updates whenever I post them. I intend to post one new update every week. As well, post your comments about my videos. They help me create better content, and it also lets YouTube recommend my videos to the correct audience. The blockout process is probably the most intuitive way to start a character. It is possibly the most important part of the creation process. I'm still in the process of perfecting the blockout, and every project is an opportunity to do so. A streamlined blockout helps with the overall proportions and shape. I start the blockout by creating the head. It is typically the first part of the sculpt, but not always. This head is broken down into two areas, the forehead and the mouth. This character's forehead is comprised of the eye sockets, the eyes and the horns. The mouth is comprised of the upper and lower jaws. I block out the upper head from a sphere and duplicate it to form the upper jaw. I then duplicate the upper jaw and rotate it to form the lower one and mask out the tongue from it. My typical workflow for the construction of an eye involves using a sphere for the eyeballs and sockets. I struggled a bit with the shape of the eyes and had to rework it later. You will observe that an oval for an eye isn't very adequate. There are times when you are left without a choice, but that rarely happens. After I am done with the eye, I block out a shape for the horn from a sphere and mirror it. When I start sculpting a character and translating it from 2D to 3D, I usually have a very clear design for the character. I achieve this by gathering references related to the topic from different sources. A lack of clarity can lead to noodling. Noodling can be beneficial if you want to come up with something new, but for the most part, it can lead to wasted time. However, I believe I had everything I wanted in this concept, so I didn't use any other reference. I create parts by using a primitive like a sphere or a box. It doesn't matter which primitive you start with, although it is wise to use one that resembles the part you are aiming for. It is always wise to start with a low resolution. It works faster and is easier to move the mesh around. I like to use only as much resolution as I need at the time, taking into consideration the limits of Blender as well as my hardware. After blocking out the head, I move to the body. I could have started the block out with the body. I find its overall shape quite fascinating. I'll confess, while researching the character, I didn't like most of the images I saw about it, but this particular illustration is a style I find very appealing. From here on, I work my way outwards and block out the upper and then lower parts of the leg. I speed things up a little by borrowing parts. For example, the fingers and the toes are very similar, so I borrow from the toes and create the fingers. In this scenario, I can take advantage of symmetry for the toes but not for the fingers. I have to create the left fingers and the palms separately from the right. Since the toes don't have a thumb, I have to create one from one of the fingers. I then position them carefully. I continue with the blockout process. As I add more detail to the sculpt, I make amendments to other parts that are affected by my addition. At this stage, I am getting all the parts of the character as quickly as possible and not lingering on any detail. It is helpful in deciding every step following this early portion. Once I am satisfied with the overall shape, I start merging specific parts. I take care not to merge all parts that will be contiguous into one just yet. The merging process is a gradual one. I try to improve the sculpt in small increments as I progress. I am constantly shaping different parts and noting how they affect the overall form. At this point, I break symmetry on the body in order to pose the tail. This turned out to be a huge mistake, and I could have held on a little longer before doing so. The mistake became very obvious at the end when I started to detail the body. One of the advantages of working digitally is that you can take advantage of symmetry and work on only half of the model. Usually, the advantage of using symmetry is lost when a character is posed. However, it can still be used on certain parts even when posed. After posing the tail to look like the concept, I add more detail by remeshing and then shape the back and tail properly. I move on to the wings. I start by creating the frame of the wings. I then position it properly in relation to the torso. I take care to ensure it's in the correct placement and then extrude to ensure there are just enough edge loops. I then build the support frames using a separate cylinder which I shape, size and position properly. The frames act like fingers in a hand. You can think of the wings like those of bats with long fingers and a very thin skin that wraps around it. After constructing the fingers of the wings, I merge them together. When I am done with the wings frame, I create the wing skin. This basically wraps around the frame nicely. I create the skin using a plane. I push the verts of a plane around, give it a little depth, and subdivide it to look like a bat's wings. The next step is the creation of the spine ridges. I used box modeling for this part. If this was a more realistic sculpt, there would have been the need for more variation on this part. This, however, is very stylized and is intended to convey a child's imagination. As a result of this, the ridges are basically uniform. The only difference between them is the placement. After that, I work on the finger and the toenails. Like the ridges, it was done using box modeling. After I'm done with the nails, I do one final box mesh, the bulb. It is comprised of a sphere and a cylinder. I could have gone into more detail with this, but I chose not to. The detail would have involved modeling the inner filament of the bulb so that I can render the glass part as transparent. It will also involve modeling the screw. I opted to save some time on the bulb since it will glow instead. The ability to rework the entire blocks is partly the reason to section out the sculpt into separate blocks. It is always easier to just rework a part than cleaning out the larger area and then reworking it. Do not hesitate to make corrections on entire parts when necessary. I decided to redo the eye because it was not shaped correctly. It should have been a sphere and not an oval. I also reworked the eye sockets as well. Blender sculpting has come a long way in the last couple of years. It is now very easy to use a lot of different workflows to create characters of illustrations like this using almost any sculpting technique. One of the invaluable tools in Blender is the remesh tool, which I use quite often while sculpting. My go-to brushes are the grab brush, the crease brush, the clay strip brush, and the smooth brush. I tend to use these brushes about 90% of the time. Using the brushes at my disposal, I add the secondary and tertiary details, and because I did a proper block out earlier, this part becomes much faster. I work my way from top to bottom, not necessarily in that order, detailing out the parts and cleaning them up. I use the combination of all the brushes at my disposal that I need for this process. I smooth out, sculpt out, crease out, until I have a final shape that I desire. Once I'm satisfied with the details, I start painting the character. It can be helpful to mask out areas when painting. Color theory is an area of art that I am currently studying. I decided to give this character a very basic color scheme based on the original work. The concept was very cartoony and not painted, so I didn't go all out with this painting. And that's how I created this character. Remember to like, comment and share this video. Also subscribe if you haven't already done so. You can see the finished result in this turntable. Hope you liked the video. See you in the next one.